Picture this under the cover of darkness. A lone figure slips past enemy lines, carrying a message that could change the course of a war. His identity unknown, his mission to deliver secrets that could save or destroy a kingdom. This wasn't just the stuff of legends, it was the daily reality of medieval warfare, where information moved faster than armies and whispers held more power than swords. Behind every great battle, behind every throne's rise or fall, there was an invisible web of spies and messengers moving like shadows across the landscape. These weren't just couriers or soldiers, they were the unsung architects of history, masters of deception and speed, operating in a world where one wrong step could mean betrayal, capture, or worse. What if I told you that some of the most pivotal moments in medieval history hinged not on the clash of steel, but on the silent, swift work of these hidden operatives? Think about it. While kings and knights took the glory, it was often the spies who gathered the intelligence that decided battles before they even began. Messages were written in code, hidden in plain sight, sometimes sewn into clothing, etched into wax tablets, or even concealed inside loaves of bread. Couriers disguised themselves as merchants, pilgrims, or even beggars, blending into the chaos of medieval life to slip past watchful eyes and the stakes. Nothing less than the survival of entire nations. This was a world where trust was a luxury, and every handshake could be a trap. So how did these networks operate? Who were the people brave or desperate enough to take on such perilous roles? And what ingenious methods did they use to outwit their enemies? From the bustling markets of Constantinople to the fog-drenched forests of England, espionage in the Middle Ages was a deadly game of cat and mouse, played for the highest stakes imaginable. In this video, we're pulling back the curtain on this shadowy world, uncovering the tricks, the betrayals, and the sheer audacity that kept empires standing or crumbling. You'll meet the masterminds who turned deception into an art form, the messengers who ran faster than rumor, and the codes so clever they baffled enemies for centuries. This isn't just history, it's a thriller waiting to be unraveled. So stay with us because the secrets of the medieval spy game are about to be revealed. The art of espionage didn't begin in the shadows of medieval castles. It was born from necessity, as old as war itself. Even ancient empires like Rome and Persia relied on scouts and informants, but the Middle Ages transformed spying from scattered tactics into a deliberate, organized craft. Why? Because in a fractured world of feuding kingdoms and shifting alliances, information wasn't just power, it was survival. Kings who couldn't peer beyond their borders were sitting ducks, blind to the armies mustering against them or the betrayals brewing in their own courts. Take the Byzantine Empire, for example. Behind the towering walls of Constantinople, emperors maintained a sophisticated web of agents known as the cryptography. These weren't just messengers, they were trained observers, skilled in cryptography, disguise, and even sabotage. They slipped into enemy camps as traders, eavesdropped on conversations in taverns, and sometimes planted false rumors to mislead rival rulers. And they weren't alone. Across Europe, feudal lords employed similar tactics, recruiting low-profile but razor-sharp individuals, monks who could travel freely under the guise of religious pilgrimage, or merchants whose carts and cargo hid coded letters beneath sacks of grain. But here's what made medieval espionage truly unique: its brutal intimacy. Unlike modern spies operating from a distance, these agents often worked face-to-face with their targets, relying on charm, quick thinking, and sometimes sheer audacity. A slip of the tongue, a misplaced trust, or a poorly forged document could mean torture or a public hanging, yet the rewards were just as extreme. A well-timed piece of intelligence could dismantle an invasion before it began, like when English scouts uncovered French plans to flank their forces at Agincourt, allowing Henry V to reposition his army and secure one of history's most unlikely victories. What's fascinating is how these early spies laid the groundwork for techniques still used today. Invisible ink, medieval messengers wrote with lemon juice or milk, revealing their secrets only when heated over a flame. Dead drops, hollowed-out walking staffs and false-bottomed wine barrels hid sensitive scrolls. And let's not forget the human element, the double agents who played both sides, like the infamous 12th century spy Eustace the Monk, a mercenary who switched loyalties between England and France so often that no one was entirely sure whose payroll he was on. This was a world where every stranger could be an enemy, every letter a trick, and every alliance a potential trap. The best spies weren't just gatherers of secrets, they were masters of psychology, exploiting trust and fear in equal measure. And as we'll see next, their methods only grew more sophisticated as the stakes rose higher while spies worked in shadows. Messengers were the beating heart of medieval warfare, visible, vulnerable, and utterly indispensable. Picture a rider galloping through the night, his cloak whipped by the wind, clutching a sealed parchment that could command armies or broker peace. These weren't just delivermen, they were the glue holding fractured battlefields together. In an era without radios or telegraphs, a single messenger's survival could determine whether reinforcements arrived in time or a castle surrendered before reinforcements could march. Speed was everything. The fastest couriers, often mounted on swift Arabian or Andalusian horses, could cover staggering distances, up to 100 miles in a single day if the stakes were high enough. Kingdoms maintained relay stations with fresh horses spaced along major routes, allowing messengers to swap mounts without losing precious hours. But even with such systems, the risks were relentless. Bandits lurked in forests, rival lords intercepted couriers to disrupt enemy plans, and harsh weather turned roads into death traps. Some messengers carried verbal orders instead of written ones, memorizing intricate battle plans to avoid leaving evidence if captured. Status offered little protection. While noble messengers might ride under flags of truce, their high rank made them tempting targets for ransom or worse. During the 100 Years' War, French knights once hanged an English herald in plain sight, sparking outrage and retaliation. Yet humble couriers faced equal danger without the shield of nobility. Many traveled in disguise, hiding royal seals beneath their tunics or posing as pilgrims to avoid suspicion. The most successful ones mastered local dialects and customs, blending in like spies when necessary. The logistical feats were staggering. Consider the Byzantine Empire's beacon system, a chain of fire signals stretching hundreds of miles to warn of invasions within hours. Or the Mongol Yam, a courier network so efficient that Marco Polo marveled at its ability to relay messages from one end of Asia to another in weeks. These systems weren't just about speed, they were about trust. Seals and signatures were meticulously forged, so messengers often carried personal tokens, a ring, a lock of hair, to prove their dispatches were genuine. One misstep could cascade into disaster, like when a misdelivered order led to the chaotic Battle of Barnet in 1471, where fog and confusion turned allies into fatal enemies. Yet for all their skill, messengers were at the mercy of fate. A wounded horse, a washed-out bridge, or a single arrow could unravel months of strategy. Their stories are etched in the margins of history, like the unnamed courier who collapsed at the gates of Vienna after racing to warn of the Ottoman advance. his last breath spent delivering the news that saved the city. These men and women were the unsung pulse of an era, their sweat and blood the ink that wrote empires, and as we'll see next, their legacy didn't vanish with the Middle Ages, it evolved into the lifelines we still rely on today. Among the shadows of history, a few names shine brighter than the rest, not because they wore crowns or led armies, but because they mastered the silent art of deception. Take Belisarius, the Byzantine general whose genius for trickery rivaled his skill on the battlefield. During the siege of Naples in 536, he didn't just outfight his enemies, he outthought them. When his forces seemed hopelessly trapped, Belisarius disguised his soldiers as locals, slipping them through enemy lines to open the city gates from within. It wasn't swords that won the day, but the careful manipulation of perception. His exploits proved that a well-placed lie could topple walls as surely as a battering ram. Then there's the enigmatic figure known only as the Scotsman, a phantom who haunted English camps during the wars of Scottish independence. Unlike knights who clashed in broad daylight, this operative moved like a ghost, gathering intelligence on troop movements and supply lines. Legend claims he posed as a minstrel, using songs and stories to loosen tongues around campfires. By the time English commanders realized their secrets had been stolen, it was too late. Their plans were already in the hands of Robert the Bruce. What made these spies extraordinary wasn't just their daring, but their understanding of human nature. They knew fear could be weaponized, trust could be exploited, and sometimes the best way to win a war was to make the enemy doubt their own eyes. But not all legendary operatives worked for kings. Consider the case of Jeanne de Clisson, the Lioness of Brittany. After her husband was executed by the French crown, she turned her grief into a relentless campaign of vengeance. Disguising her ships as merchant vessels, she lured French patrols into traps, then slaughtered their crews without mercy. Her brutality was strategic. Each attack sent a chilling message: no one was safe. Yet even she understood the power of subtlety. By leaving a handful of survivors to spread tales of her ruthlessness, she turned her name into a weapon, paralyzing French commanders with dread before she ever fired a cannon. What united these figures wasn't just their audacity, but their adaptability. They thrived in a world where rules were written in smoke, where today's ally could be tomorrow's executioner. And while their methods varied, Belisarius's tactical brilliance, the Scotsman's anonymity, Jeanne's psychological warfare, they shared one trait: an uncanny ability to see the threads of power invisible to others. Their stories remind us that in the Middle Ages, the sharpest blade wasn't made of steel, it was the mind behind the disguise. In a world where a single intercepted message could doom a kingdom, medieval spies didn't just hide their secrets, they transformed them into something unrecognizable. Imagine a letter that looks like an ordinary merchant's inventory, but when held over a candle, hidden words flare to life between the lines. Lemon juice or milk, heated gently, revealed urgent dispatches invisible to prying eyes. But that was just the beginning. For messages too sensitive to risk even this, spies turned to ciphers so clever they'd baffle modern codebreakers. The simplest involved shifting letters, writing B for A, C for B, and so on. To an outsider, the text seemed gibberish, but to a trusted ally with the key, it was a lifeline. Some codes went beyond letters. The Vatican spies during the Renaissance used a cipher wheel designed by none other than Leon Battista Alberti, a device that could scramble messages into thousands of possible combinations. Meanwhile, in England, Queen Elizabeth I's spymaster, Francis Walsingham, employed a team of linguists to craft codes where entire words stood for names of places or people, turning a seemingly innocent recipe into a battle plan. But the most intriguing might be the symbols of the Voynich manuscript, a 15th century book filled with bizarre plants, celestial diagrams, and an alphabet no one has ever decoded. Was it a spy's handbook, an alchemist's notes, or an elaborate hoax? Centuries later, we still don't know. The real genius lay in the delivery. Messengers smuggled coded letters inside hollowed-out walking sticks, sealed within wax tablets, or stitched into the seams of clothing. One infamous trick involved writing on the inside of a freshly peeled egg. The ink seeped through the porous shell, leaving the surface blank until cracked open. And if capture seemed likely, some couriers swallowed thin parchment strips, knowing stomach acid would dissolve the evidence before enemies could extract it. These methods weren't just clever, they were survival. When Mary, Queen of Scots, plotted against Elizabeth, her letters, encrypted with a sophisticated cipher, were intercepted and cracked, sealing her fate. Every failed code had consequences, and every success reshaped history. What's astonishing is how these medieval innovations echo today. The same principles that hid messages in loaves of bread now secure our digital communications, proving that the battle between secrecy and discovery is as old as time and far from over. The price of secrecy in the medieval world wasn't just measured in gold, it was paid in blood. For every spy who slipped through enemy lines undetected, countless others met gruesome fates. Capture wasn't merely a setback, it was a death sentence, often preceded by horrors designed to break the strongest wills. Interrogators had a grim toolkit at their disposal. The rack stretched limbs until joints dislocated. The Iron Maiden spikes promised slow agony, and water torture left victims gasping for air that wouldn't come. These weren't just punishments, they were spectacles meant to terrify others into compliance. A single executed spy could paralyze an entire network as loyalty crumbled under the weight of fear. Yet even these brutalities paled beside the psychological warfare. A captured messenger might be forced to watch as their family's fate hung in the balance, a knife at a child's throat, a noose around a spouse's neck, all to loosen their tongue. Some interrogators exploited superstition, threatening curses or eternal damnation to exploit medieval fears. The Church's involvement added another layer of dread. A spy accused of heresy faced not just earthly torture but the terror of divine wrath. What's chilling is how routine betrayal became. A Venetian operative during the Crusades, caught with coded letters, was given a cruel choice: reveal his contacts or watch his entire neighborhood burn. He broke, and his confession led to a purge that wiped out an entire spy ring. Even the most loyal agents could turn when faced with impossible choices. Gold was a common motivator, but so was survival. Double agents like the infamous Pierre de la Brosse, a French courtier who sold secrets to multiple kingdoms, proved that trust was the rarest currency of all. And yet, against all odds, volunteers still stepped forward. Why? Because the rewards outweighed the risks. A peasant-turned-spy could earn enough to buy land, a merchant might secure royal favor, and a disgraced knight could reclaim honor through covert service. The most successful operatives, like those in the service of Frederick II of Sicily, were granted titles, estates, and immunity from prosecution perks that made the gamble irresistible. The true cost of this shadow war wasn't just paid by those who died screaming in dungeons. It seeped into the fabric of society, turning neighbor against neighbor. When King Edward I of England suspected Welsh rebels were hiding among local villages, he ordered entire communities tortured until someone talked. The message was clear: in the game of spies, no one was innocent. This was a world where every handshake hid a blade, every smile could mask a lie, and the line between hero and traitor was drawn in shifting sand. History often paints medieval women as damsels or dutiful wives, but behind closed doors, many were pulling the strings of power with a finesse that would make modern spies envious. Take Yolande of Aragon, the savvy queen whose political maneuvers kept France from collapsing during the 100 Years' War. While Joan of Arc rallied troops on the battlefield, Yolande worked the shadows funding armies, brokering secret alliances and planting informants in enemy courts. Her most brilliant move, installing trusted agents in the household of the young Dauphin, ensuring every whisper reaching his ear was one she'd sanctioned. This wasn't just diplomacy, it was espionage disguised as motherhood, proving that a woman's influence could shape kingdoms without ever lifting a sword. Then there were the women who weaponized perception itself. In the glittering courts of Burgundy and Castile, noblewomen like Isabella of Portugal mastered the art of the listening ear. Hosting lavish feasts wasn't just about displaying wealth, it was about loosening tongues with wine and music, then discreetly passing whispered secrets to waiting couriers. Their greatest advantage, society's underestimation. While men guarded their words around rival lords, they rarely thought twice about boasting in front of a seemingly disinterested countess or her ladies-in-waiting. But not all female operatives relied on nobility for cover. The anonymous washerwomen of castle staff, often dismissed as mere servants, were perfectly positioned to notice which lords received coded letters, which bedchambers hosted midnight meetings, or which kitchen scraps held traces of poison. In one notorious case, a linen maid in the service of England's Henry VI uncovered a plot by simply observing which nobles requested fresh sheets after secretive late-night visits. Her report to the crown prevented an assassination, and her reward, not a title, but a pension carefully buried in royal accounting to avoid embarrassing the plotters' powerful families. The most daring women blurred the line between spy and seductress. Chronicles hint at figures like the elusive Dame de Beauté, a French courtesan whose network of lovers stretched from Paris to Constantinople. She didn't just steal hearts, she extracted battle plans from drunken knights, copied keys, wax impressions taken in intimate moments, and even smuggled messages inside gifts of perfumed gloves. Yet these women paid a steep price when caught. Unlike male agents who might be ransomed, female spies faced accusations of witchcraft or moral corruption, their reputations shredded to discredit their intelligence. What makes their stories so revolutionary is how they exploited the very constraints meant to silence them. Banned from war councils, they eavesdropped from adjoining chambers. Denied literacy, they memorized conversations verbatim. Dismissed as frivolous, they turned gossip into an intelligence network. These women didn't just participate in the spy game, they redefined it, crafting a legacy of cunning that still echoes in the shadowy corners of power today. In the quiet cloisters of medieval monasteries, far from the clash of swords, another kind of war was being waged, one fought with parchment, ink, and whispered confessions. Religious orders, with their sprawling networks of abbeys and pilgrim routes, became unlikely epicenters of espionage. Monks enjoyed a privilege few others did, the freedom to cross borders under the sacred banner of faith, their robes offering both camouflage and credibility. A Benedictine brother traveling from Paris to Rome might carry more than just prayers, hidden compartments in his satchel, could hold troop movements sketched between the lines of illuminated manuscripts, or coded messages pressed into the wax of seemingly innocent seals. The Knights Templar took this shadowy craft to astonishing heights. Officially, they were warrior monks protecting pilgrims, but their true power lay in an invisible web of informants stretching from London to Jerusalem. Templar preceptories functioned as medieval intelligence hubs, where merchants, nobles, and even rival clergy unwittingly traded secrets over shared meals. Their banking system, a revolutionary network of credit letters, doubled as a perfect cover for moving sensitive information. A Templar agent in Acre could deposit funds, and within weeks, a brother in Paris would disperse them along with hidden instructions etched in the ledger's margins. What made these religious spies so effective wasn't just their access, but their perceived impartiality. A Cistercian abbot mediating between feuding lords could glean battle plans while pretending to broker peace. Confessionals became intelligence goldmines as penitents divulged secrets under the seal of the sacrament, a loophole some clergy exploited by sending anonymous tips to rulers. Even the Vatican played the game. Papal legates often carried dual mandates, their holy missions masking political reconnaissance. Yet this blending of faith and espionage carried profound risks. When the Templars fell from grace in the early 14th century, their alleged secret rituals, whispered to involve coded initiation rites and clandestine meetings, were used as evidence of heresy. Were these truly blasphemies, or just the operational secrecy necessary for their intelligence work? The line between piety and subterfuge had grown dangerously thin. Smaller orders proved equally cunning. Dominican friars, tasked with rooting out heresy, developed interrogation techniques that doubled as spycraft, extracting information through carefully staged debates. Meanwhile, humble parish priests in border regions often served as lookouts, ringing church bells in specific patterns to signal approaching armies. The very infrastructure of medieval Christianity, its pilgrim roads, scriptoria, and confessional booths became tools in a silent war, proving that in the Middle Ages, even salvation had its spies. When human messengers couldn't slip past watchful eyes, medieval commanders turned to nature's own couriers, creatures whose loyalty and instincts made them perfect for clandestine missions. Carrier pigeons, with their uncanny ability to find their way home across hundreds of miles, became the stealth fighters of the skies. Tied to their legs, tiny scrolls held battle plans, warnings of ambushes, or pleas for reinforcements, all protected by the bird's unassuming appearance. Unlike a rider who might be stopped at a checkpoint, a pigeon darting overhead drew little suspicion. The Byzantines were among the first to master their use, maintaining dovecotes near border fortresses so the birds could relay invasion alerts in hours instead of days. But pigeons weren't the only animals drafted into service. In the dense forests of Eastern Europe, dogs, trained to follow scent trails, carried messages strapped to their collars between allied outposts. Their speed and silence made them ideal for short, dangerous routes where human runners might be spotted. Meanwhile, the Mongols employed a clever trick with their famed horses. By releasing riderless mounts trained to return to camp, they could send simple prearranged signals like the number of horses sent back, indicating the size of an approaching enemy force. The brilliance of these methods lay in their simplicity. A pigeon needed no roads, a dog no bribes, and a horse no explanation. They bypassed language barriers and couldn't be tortured for secrets. Yet their use wasn't without risk. Predators, harsh weather, or even an arrow could end a mission abruptly. Some lords kept falcons specifically to intercept enemy messenger birds mid-flight, turning the skies into a battlefield of feathers and cunning. Perhaps the most poignant tale comes from the Siege of Leyden in 1574, when Dutch rebels released pigeons carrying pleas for help, only for Spanish forces to shoot them down. But one bird, wounded and exhausted, made it through, its message sparking the floodwaters that broke the siege. These creatures didn't just deliver words, they carried the fate of nations on their wings, paws, and hooves, proving that in war, even the smallest allies could tilt the scales of history. Sieges were more than just walls against battering rams, they were battles of wits, where a single spy could turn the tide without a single arrow being fired. Picture a city surrounded, its gates locked, its people starving. Outside, the attacking army waits, but their real weapon isn't catapults or ladders. It's the shadowy figures slipping through cracks in the defenses, whispering to disgruntled guards or tossing coded messages over the walls with slingshots. These infiltrators didn't just gather intelligence, they weaponized it. A well-placed rumor about dwindling supplies could spark panic inside the city, while details about a hidden sewer entrance could give besiegers the break they needed. Some of the most daring operatives posed as refugees, blending into crowds of desperate civilians fleeing the fighting. Once inside, they'd note the location of grain stores, count the number of able-bodied defenders, or even sabotage critical infrastructure. There are accounts of spies sprinkling powdered lime into flour sacks, ensuring besieged garrisons would slowly weaken from stomach ailments. Others tampered with siege engines under cover of darkness, loosening bolts on catapults so they'd fail mid-battle. The defenders, of course, fought back with their own counterintelligence. They posted guards near wells, inspected incoming refugees for hidden blades or poison, and spread false information through deliberately leaked letters. One of the most infamous examples comes from the siege of Château-Gaillard in 1204. French forces, unable to breach the fortress's formidable walls, sent a team disguised as monks to deliver alms to the starving defenders. Hidden beneath their robes were ropes and grappling hooks. That night, they scaled a poorly guarded latrine chute, opened the gates from within, and doomed the stronghold. It was a stark lesson. No fortress was impenetrable if the enemy could exploit human trust. But sieges also birthed ingenious defensive tricks. Commanders rotated passwords daily to catch infiltrators, used mirror signals to coordinate with relief forces, and even trained dogs to sniff out unfamiliar scents near supply stores. The psychological warfare was relentless. Besiegers might launch diseased animals over walls to spread illness, while defenders floated fake deserters back to enemy camps with exaggerated tales of their suffering. Every scrap of information was a potential lifeline or a death sentence. What made siege espionage so brutal was its intimacy. Unlike open battle, where armies clashed at a distance, here, spies and soldiers often lived side by side for months, sharing the same hunger, the same fears. A friendly face at the campfire could be plotting your demise, and a child begging for bread might be counting your archers. In the end, the strongest walls couldn't defend against betrayal, and that was the spy's greatest weapon of all. In the glittering courts of medieval Europe, where ambassadors bowed with silken words and jeweled gifts, the most dangerous weapons weren't daggers, they were secrets wrapped in diplomacy. An envoy's official mission might be to negotiate a marriage alliance or renew a trade agreement, but their hidden task was often far more audacious: to study fortifications, gauge military readiness, and identify which nobles could be bribed or blackmailed. The Byzantine Empire elevated this double game to an art form. Their ambassadors, trained in rhetoric and cryptography, would arrive with lavish presents, exotic silks, intricate clocks, while their attendants discreetly mapped palace layouts and memorized the faces of potential informants. Consider the case of Leo Quirosfax, a 10th-century Byzantine diplomat sent to the Bulgar court. Officially, he was there to discuss border disputes. Unofficially, he spent months cataloging the Bulgar king's weaknesses: his heavy drinking, his reliance on a superstitious astrologer, details that later allowed Emperor Basil II to crush the Bulgars in battle. Quirosfax didn't just negotiate, he engineered his host's downfall from within, proving that a well-placed compliment could be deadlier than a volley of arrows. But the Byzantines weren't alone in this silent warfare. Venetian ambassadors, renowned for their polished manners, filed shockingly detailed reports back to the Doge, notes on everything from the thickness of a rival city's walls to the mistresses of foreign princes. These dispatches, preserved in archives like the infamous Venetian Relations, read like spy manuals advising future envoys to flatter the ruler's hobbies and count the number of chimneys in the royal quarter to estimate troop capacity. The stakes were dizzyingly high. A single intercepted letter could spark war, as happened in 1422 when a Hungarian diplomat's coded message to Vienna was cracked, revealing plans to partition Bohemia. Yet the rewards justified the risks. A successful diplomatic spy could shift alliances without raising a sword, like the French envoy who, during the 100 Years' War, convinced Burgundy to abandon England by revealing fabricated letters proving English treachery. Truth was flexible in the hands of a skilled operative. Sometimes, the most effective lies were the ones that confirmed what a ruler already feared. What's fascinating is how these ambassadors balanced visibility with invisibility. They had to be prominent enough to access secrets yet discreet enough to avoid suspicion. Some played the fool, leaning into stereotypes of bumbling scholars to mask their sharp observations. Others weaponized their outsider status, like the Persian envoy to Constantinople who accidentally got lost in the palace gardens, a stroll that revealed the emperor's private escape route. Their legacy endures in modern diplomacy, where embassies still function as hubs of intelligence, proving that even in an age of satellites and cyber warfare, the oldest tricks remain the most effective. In the back alleys of medieval Europe, where gold changed hands in hushed whispers, information wasn't just power, it was currency. Unlike modern intelligence agencies with their rigid loyalties, the medieval spy trade had a thriving black market where secrets were bought and sold like bolts of silk or barrels of wine. At the heart of this shadow economy were the mercenary spies, operators who pledged allegiance not to crowns or causes, but to the heaviest purse. The infamous Italian condottieri, known for renting out their armies to the highest bidder, had their counterparts in the espionage world, men and women who'd sell a rival lord's battle plans as casually as a butcher sold meat. Take the case of Giovanni de' Medici, a Florentine operative who played both sides of the Milanese-Venetian conflict in the 15th century. To the Milanese, he was a trusted cryptographer. To the Venetians, he was a source of decoded dispatches, all while pocketing payments from both. His betrayal wasn't discovered until a Venetian official, drunk at a feast, bragged about knowing Milan's troop movements before they'd even been announced. By then, Giovanni had vanished, likely to another court where his skills would fetch a fresh price. This was the ruthless calculus of the freelance spy. Loyalty was a temporary condition, renewable only with another sack of silver. The trade in secrets bred paranoia at the highest levels. Kings began encrypting even routine correspondence, not just to thwart enemies, but to guard against their own advisors. In England, Edward IV employed a master of spies solely to root out double agents within his household, leading to the shocking execution of his own chamberlain, Thomas Vaughan, who'd been selling council minutes to the French. The irony, Vaughan's handler in Paris was himself a double agent, feeding fabricated intelligence back to the English. It was a hall of mirrors where no one could be certain who was playing whom. What made this system so volatile was its informality. Unlike modern intelligence networks with vetting processes and code names, medieval spy rings often relied on loose affiliations. A disgruntled scribe might pass along a copied letter for a handful of coins. A traveling minstrel could barter overheard tavern gossip for a noble's patronage. The sheer accessibility of the trade meant secrets leaked like wine from a cracked barrel. In Aragon, Queen Isabella once intercepted a letter from her own treasurer, offering to reveal the kingdom's financial vulnerabilities. not to a foreign power, but to a consortium of Catalan merchants betting against the crown's stability. Yet for all its chaos, the black market had its own twisted rules. Reputation mattered. A spy known for selling fabricated intelligence might find himself without buyers, or worse, dangling from a noose. The smartest operatives, like the shadowy figure known only as the Broker of Bruges, acted as middlemen, verifying sources before brokering deals. He maintained a ledger of which informants were reliable, which nobles were susceptible to bribery, and which secrets were too dangerous to touch. His most infamous transaction, the sale of Burgundy's naval routes to the English, a deal that allegedly included a clause ensuring he'd be paid double if the information led to a sunk fleet. It did. This murky economy reveals a darker truth about medieval warfare. For many, espionage wasn't about ideology or survival, but opportunity. When the Byzantine general Belisarius retook Rome in 536, he didn't just face Gothic armies. He battled mercenary spies hired by both sides, some of whom switched allegiances mid-siege when payments stalled. The risk of betrayal was so high that commanders sometimes planted false intelligence among their own ranks, knowing it would be sold just to mislead enemies. In the end, the black market of secrets didn't just fuel conflicts. It turned every war into a three-front battle, against the enemy across the field, the traitors within the gates, and the shadowy figures brokering the difference. Becoming a master of shadows in the Middle Ages wasn't something you stumbled into. It was a craft honed through meticulous training, often starting young. Take the Byzantine Empire's infamous cryptography, where recruits were drilled in languages until they could flawlessly mimic the dialects of rival regions. A slip of accent could mean exposure, so trainees spent months immersed in foreign speech patterns, sometimes living undercover in target cities as merchants or pilgrims. But languages were just the beginning. Cryptography turned words into weapons. Apprentices memorized complex cipher systems, like the Caesar shift, where letters were moved 3 places down the alphabet, turning attack into DWWDFN. More advanced operatives learned steganography, hiding messages in plain sight by pricking tiny holes above specific letters in innocuous texts or weaving coded patterns into embroidery. Disguise was an art form unto itself. A spy might spend weeks studying a particular role: a wool trader from Flanders, a leper begging alms, even a mute servant perfecting every detail, from the calluses on their hands to the way they limped after a day in the fields. The best trainers understood psychology. To pose as a minstrel, you didn't just learn songs. You adopted the flamboyant gestures and the slight arrogance of a performer who'd entertained nobles. Noble-born agents faced a different challenge. Their education included courtly dances, heraldry, and even the proper way to sigh over a chess match, subtle refinements that let them whisper secrets between the lines of polished small talk. Physical training was equally brutal. Couriers ran miles in weighted boots to build endurance, knowing a single delayed message could lose a war. Scouts practiced moving silently through underbrush, their footsteps masked by the rustle of leaves. Some schools even taught acrobatics, how to scale walls or drop from heights without injury, skills that turned a fleeing spy into a ghost. But the most critical lessons weren't about technique, they were about survival. Trainees were thrown into mock interrogations, subjected to sleep deprivation and psychological torment until they could lie convincingly under pressure. The lucky ones learned to swallow tiny parchment strips without gagging. The unlucky ones were left to explain their failures to handlers with very low tolerance for mistakes. This wasn't just preparation, it was transformation. By the time an operative was deployed, they weren't merely playing a role, they'd become it. When Elena of Aquitaine's spies infiltrated rival courts, their fluency in local gossip and wine preferences made them indistinguishable from lifelong courtiers. And when Mongol scouts relayed battlefield reports across thousands of miles, their ability to read terrain and predict weather wasn't luck, it was the result of years tracking herds across the steppes. These weren't amateurs dabbling in deception. They were professionals who understood that in the game of shadows, mastery meant the difference between victory and a shallow grave. In the sprawling empires of the Middle Ages, where a delayed message could mean the fall of a fortress or the collapse of a supply line, speed wasn't just an advantage, it was life or death. That's why the most powerful rulers didn't just rely on lone riders. They built intricate relay systems that functioned like medieval highways for information. Take the Mongol Yam, a network so efficient it could move a message from the Danube to the Yellow River in under 2 weeks, a distance that would take an ordinary traveler months. At its peak, this system boasted stations every 20 to 30 miles, each stocked with fresh horses, food, and couriers ready to sprint the next leg. The secret wasn't just the horse's speed, it was the precision of the handoff. A rider would gallop into a station, shout his message to the waiting courier, who'd already be mounting as the words left his predecessor's lips. No pauses, no delays, just a seamless baton pass of words and urgency. But the Mongols weren't alone in this innovation. The Byzantines strung beacon towers along their frontiers, where guards would light coordinated fires to signal invasions, sending warnings faster than any rider could hope to match. In France, the royal post employed a rotating cast of couriers who knew their home stretches of road like the backs of their hands, which bends to take at full speed, which river fords were safest in flood season. These weren't just messengers, they were human algorithms calculating risks on the fly to shave precious minutes off their routes. The true genius of these systems lay in their adaptability. During the 100 Years' War, English commanders tweaked their relay routes monthly to avoid French ambushes, using fishermen's boats to carry dispatches along coastlines when land routes became too dangerous. Meanwhile, Venetian merchants turned their trading outposts into impromptu intelligence hubs, where a letter from Alexandria could reach the Doge's desk faster than official diplomatic envoys. Speed wasn't just about horsepower, it was about outthinking the enemy at every turn. Yet for all their sophistication, these networks had a fatal vulnerability: trust. Every station master, every groom holding a fresh horse, was a potential leak or traitor. That's why the most sensitive messages traveled with tamper-proof seals, like the Byzantine lead bully that shattered if opened improperly, or were split into multiple parts, sent by different routes to confuse interceptors. The Mongols took it further, tattooing urgent dispatches onto the shaved scalps of couriers, letting hair regrow to conceal them until arrival. What's astonishing is how these ancient systems foreshadowed modern logistics. The Yam's relay stations operated like medieval data centers, optimizing routes in real time. The Byzantine beacons, a crude but effective version of optical telegraphy. Even the fragility of trust echoes today's cybersecurity struggles. These weren't just ways to move words, they were the nervous systems of empires, pulsing with secrets that shaped the fate of nations. And when they failed, the consequences were catastrophic. In 1520, a delayed message about Suleiman the Magnificent's march toward Hungary arrived too late to muster defenses, leading to the fall of Belgrade. It was a stark reminder, in the medieval world, information didn't just travel, it conquered. Long before medieval spies slipped through castle corridors, they stalked the pages of stories and songs, their exploits immortalized in ink and oral tradition. Take Reynard the Fox, the sly trickster of European fables whose endless schemes forging alliances only to betray them. disguising himself as a monk to steal treasure, mirrored the real-world tactics of double agents. These tales weren't just entertainment, they were training manuals in disguise, teaching listeners how to spot deception by reveling in it. Even King Arthur's legends brim with shadowy operators, Merlin gathering intelligence through prophecy, Morgan Le Fay weaving espionage into her enchantments, or the enigmatic Green Knight testing loyalties with impossible bargains. What's striking is how these literary spies reflected societal anxieties. The anonymous Black Knight of chivalric romances, who eavesdropped on enemies by hiding in plain sight, tapped into nobles' fear that armor couldn't shield them from betrayal. Meanwhile, peasant folktales like The Clever Peasant Girl celebrated underdog spies, commoners who outwitted kings by noticing overlooked details, a subtle nod to how real medieval informants often came from society's margins. Religious texts got in on the act too. Medieval mystery plays dramatized biblical spies like Rahab, the Canaanite prostitute who sheltered Israelite scouts, her story rewritten to emphasize how even sinful informants could become instruments of divine will. Saints' lives were no different. Saint Genevieve of Paris was said to have intercepted pagan attack plans through divine visions, blurring the line between piety and reconnaissance. But perhaps the most revealing stories were the cautionary ones. The Icelandic sagas warned of spies like Jester, whose obsession with uncovering secrets led him to madness, a stark reminder that in the real world, curiosity could be fatal. These narratives didn't just describe espionage, they shaped it. When English agents infiltrated Welsh courts in the 15th century, they reportedly took inspiration from the Mabinogians' tales of magical disguise. Reality and legend fed each other in an endless loop, proving that in the Middle Ages the pen and the like could be as mighty as the sword. The hunt for spies wasn't just about catching them, it was about turning their own weapons against them. Medieval rulers quickly realized that for every secret they protected, they could plant a lie to mislead their enemies. Imagine a carefully crafted letter, its ink still damp, detailing a fictional troop movement or a non-existent alliance. This wasn't just deception, it was a trap designed to lure enemy operatives into revealing themselves. King Louis XI of France was a master of this game. He once leaked plans to attack Burgundy through the Alps, knowing the route was impassable in winter. When Burgundian spies took the bait and redirected their defenses, Louis struck elsewhere, crushing their unprepared flank. The lesson was clear: in the shadows, truth was malleable, and the best defense was a well-told lie. But false intelligence was only the beginning. Surveillance in the Middle Ages relied on human eyes and ears rather than technology. Suspicious travelers might find themselves shadowed by innocent bystanders, a baker noting their movements, a scribe coincidentally seated nearby at every tavern. Castles employed whisperers, servants trained to linger near guest chambers, their ears pressed to doors or their eyes scanning discarded wax tablets for impressions of secret messages. The Venetians institutionalized this with their Council of Ten, which maintained a network of informants reporting on foreign dignitaries' every conversation, right down to their offhand remarks about the weather, often coded references to military plans. Then there were the double agents, the most volatile pieces in this deadly puzzle. A captured spy faced a grim choice: execution or flipping allegiance. Those who chose the latter became puppets of their captors, feeding former masters poisoned information while extracting real secrets. The English crown's use of a turned Scottish operative during the Wars of Independence led to the massacre of an entire rebel band lured into a false truce. But the risks were astronomical. Double agents lived on knife edges, knowing their handlers might discard them the moment their usefulness waned, or that their original employers might dispatch assassins. The infamous case of Jean de Wavrin, a Burgundian knight who spied for both France and England, ended with his own squire driving a dagger into his ribs during confession, a grim reminder that in this world, even prayer couldn't shield you from betrayal. Interrogation was where the game turned visceral, while physical torture, the rack, the thumbscrews, the dreaded Iron Maiden, featured prominently. Seasoned interrogators preferred psychological warfare. A prisoner might be subjected to mock executions, forced to watch accomplices confess actually actors, or isolated in lightless cells until time itself became a torment. The goal wasn't just pain, it was disintegration of the self. The Byzantines refined this to an art, using sensory deprivation to make captives doubt their own memories before offering salvation in exchange for cooperation. Yet even here, spies fought back. The smartest operatives memorized false backstories or ingested herbs to induce confusion, muddying their interrogators' efforts. This relentless back and forth birthed an entire vocabulary of suspicion. Royal courts developed elaborate protocols burning documents after reading, assigning bodyguards to monitor each other, even speaking in riddles during council meetings. The French court's habit of discussing sensitive matters while hunting wasn't just for leisure. The noise of hounds and horns made eavesdropping impossible. Every layer of security, however, bred new ingenuity in circumvention. When the Castilians began sealing letters with complex sigils, Aragonese spies responded by replicating the seals using stolen candle wax and engraved rings. What emerges from this shadow war isn't just a tale of cruelty or cunning, but a paradox. The very systems designed to root out spies often relied on the same skills they sought to punish. A counterintelligence officer needed a spy's guile to catch one, blurring the line between hunter and prey. In the end, the most enduring legacy of medieval counterintelligence might be its stark revelation that in the pursuit of security, no one could afford to be entirely what they seemed. Merchants moved through the medieval world like shadows in plain sight, their wagons laden with silks and spices, their ledgers hiding more than just accounts. To kings and emperors, these traders were more than suppliers of luxury goods. They were living maps of enemy territories, their trade routes doubling as intelligence networks. A Venetian merchant sipping wine in a Cairo marketplace wasn't just haggling over prices, he was counting the number of Mamluk soldiers patrolling the docks, noting which gates were left unguarded at dusk, or casually asking about the Sultan's health over shared figs. Commerce provided the perfect cover. Who would suspect a man obsessed with profit margins of memorizing fortress layouts? The Silk Road became the ultimate spy corridor. Muslim traders carrying Persian carpets into Christian Europe could report back on castle defenses, while Genos merchants in Mongol ruled Crimea relayed details of Golden Horde troop movements. Some rulers actively cultivated these informants. The Byzantine Emperor Alexios Komnenos granted tax exemptions to Italian traders who provided reliable intelligence, while the Mongols issued special Pesa passports to favored merchants' metal tablets that doubled as safe conduct passes and espionage licenses. These weren't just business deals, they were contracts written in whispers where a shipment of alum from Anatolia might be exchanged for the location of an enemy's supply train. But the most ingenious merchant spies operated without royal patronage, playing both sides for maximum gain. Take the case of Jacob van Artevelde, a Flemish cloth magnate during the 100 Years' War. Officially neutral, he supplied wool to both England and France while maintaining a private network of weavers and dockworkers who tracked naval movements. His true allegiance to whichever kingdom offered the best trade terms that season, neutrality became his weapon. By appearing indispensable to all, he gained access to secrets that would make a dedicated spy blush. The Hanseatic League elevated this duality to an art form. This powerhouse trade alliance controlled ports from Novgorod to London, their warehouses brimming with intelligence alongside Baltic grain and Russian furs. When the Danes threatened Hanseatic shipping in the 14th century, the League didn't just send warships, they activated their merchant informants in Copenhagen taverns, who spread rumors of phantom fleets until the Danish king hesitated long enough for reinforcements to arrive. It was economic warfare disguised as gossip, proving that a well-placed lie in a drunkard's ear could be as decisive as a volley of arrows. Yet this system had its vulnerabilities. Merchants who grew too skilled at espionage risked blowing their cover, like the notorious case of Giovanni Bembo. This Venetian spice trader had spent years infiltrating Ottoman circles, but when he began asking too pointedly about shipbuilding quotas, a suspicious vizier had his cargo inspected, revealing hollowed-out cinnamon sticks stuffed with sketches of naval dry docks. Bembo's execution sent shockwaves through merchant guilds, a grim reminder that even the best disguise had limits. What's fascinating is how these commercial spies shaped military strategy. Armies began timing campaigns to coincide with trade fairs, knowing the influx of merchants would mask scouts and couriers. Castle architects redesigned storage cellars to prevent lost traders from snooping. Even the humble bill of lading became a tool of deception, with false cargo manifests used to mislead enemies about supply shortages. This was espionage woven into the fabric of daily life, where every market stall and mule train pulsed with hidden potential. The medieval world understood something we often forget, that information doesn't just travel through secret channels, but through the same currents that carry salt, silver, and silk. Among these unsung heroes of medieval warfare, few stories shine as brightly as that of the rider who carried word of William the Conqueror's victory at Hastings in 1066. Covering nearly 70 miles of rough terrain in a single day, this unnamed courier didn't just deliver news, he delivered a new era. With Saxon resistance crumbling and London's nobles trembling at the rumor of Harold's death, his breakneck ride ensured William's claim reached the city before panic could solidify into organized defiance. Imagine the scene: a lone figure streaked with mud and sweat, his horse foaming at the mouth as he thundered through village after village, the weight of a kingdom hanging on his stamina. This wasn't just speed, it was strategy in motion, proving that in warfare, timing could be as decisive as any sword thrust. Equally astonishing were the messengers threading through the chaos of the Crusades. While knights and pilgrims grabbed glory on battlefields, it was these couriers who kept fractured armies connected across impossible distances. Take the case of the Armenian rider who slipped through Seljuk patrols in 1191 to warn Richard the Lionheart of Saladin's trap at Jaffa. Disguised as a fruit seller, he hid his message in a hollowed-out pomegranate, evading capture by bribing guards with the very fruit concealing his secret. His success didn't just save lives, it reshaped the entire campaign, allowing Richard to outmaneuver one of history's greatest tacticians. But not all legendary runs ended in triumph. In 1453, as Ottoman cannons pounded Constantinople's walls, a Venetian sailor volunteered to sneak through the blockade and beg Europe for reinforcements. He made it to Crete, but his plea fell on deaf ears. The ships that might have saved the Byzantine capital arrived too late. His mission became a haunting what-if, underscoring how even the bravest efforts could crumble against political indifference. What united these couriers wasn't just their physical grit, but their mental resilience. They navigated by starlight when roads turned treacherous, memorized dispatches word for word to avoid carrying incriminating documents, and sometimes ran barefoot to silence their footsteps. The Mongol Empire's messengers, trained from childhood to endure freezing nights and scorching days without complaint, could reportedly recognize individual horses by their hoofbeats in the dark, a skill that meant the difference between evading ambush or galloping straight into one. Their legacy lingers in surprising ways. The modern marathon traces its origins to the Greek runner Philippides, but medieval Europe had its own equivalents like the Breton couriers who competed in annual races to prove their stamina, their routes later becoming postal roads. These weren't just tests of speed, they were rehearsals for the day a rider's lungs and legs might mean the difference between a kingdom saved or lost. While chronicles celebrated kings and conquests, it was these fleet-footed, steel-nerved men and women who truly stitched the medieval world together, one perilous sprint at a time. Hidden compartments weren't just for messages, they turned everyday objects into lifelines for medieval spies. A pilgrim's staff might unscrew to reveal a tightly rolled parchment, while a merchant's belt could conceal a dagger-thin slot for coded notes. But the real masterpiece, the almsgiver's purse, a seemingly charitable pouch with a false bottom where coins clinked above, masking the treasonous documents beneath. Even jewelry became a tool. Rings with rotating bezels hid tiny compartments for poison or cipher keys, proving that in the right hands, even fashion could be tactical. Mirrors, often dismissed as vanity items, became silent screamers across battlefields. Byzantine sentries used polished bronze sheets to flash warnings between watchtowers, their reflections cutting through fog faster than any courier. The technique was so effective that during the siege of Constantinople, defenders coordinated counterattacks using nothing but sunlight and angled glass. But mirrors had a darker use. Interrogators would blindfold captives, then suddenly flash light into their eyes, disorienting them into spilling secrets. A simple household object weaponized. Then there were the birds. Pigeons get all the fame, but ravens and crows were the unsung heroes of medieval espionage. Smarter and less conspicuous, they could be trained to carry tiny scrolls tied to their legs, or even to peck at specific windows to signal safe houses. One account from Burgundy describes a raven that learned to mimic a baker's whistle, flying breadcrumbs to imprisoned agents as a cover for delivering lockpicks. Operatives didn't just adapt nature's tools, they hacked its instincts, but nothing embodied ingenuity quite like the letter dagger. Found in the ruins of a Castilian noble's estate, this weapon's hilt unscrewed to reveal a cavity for silk-thin dispatches. The genius, its balance was deliberately flawed. Anyone swinging it in combat would feel its awkward weight, but a spy carrying it sheathed would go unnoticed. Some blades even had grooves to hold poison capsules, turning a last resort into a lethal secret. What's striking isn't just the creativity, but the universality of these tricks. From the snowbound keeps of Russia to the sun-baked forts of Andalusia, spies independently invented near-identical solutions. A Mongolian saddlebag with a hidden map compartment mirrored the design of a French abbot's Bible case. Whether by shared logic or whispered tradecraft, these operatives proved that innovation thrived in the shadows. Their legacy, a reminder that sometimes the simplest tools, a flicker of light, a bird's flight path, the hilt of a knife, can outwit the most advanced defenses. In the shadowy world of medieval espionage, morality was a shifting landscape where the line between righteous service and damnable deceit blurred with every whispered secret. The church thundered against deception from its pulpits, quoting scripture that condemned liars to hellfire, yet kings and bishops alike employed spies without hesitation. This paradox haunted the consciences of many operatives. Take the case of Brother Conrad, a Benedictine monk recruited by the Holy Roman Emperor to infiltrate a rival duke's court. His orders to pose as a wandering healer while documenting troop numbers. For months, he blessed children and treated fevers by day, then penned coded reports by candlelight until a dying man begged his absolution for a lifetime of sin. Conrad's crisis of faith mirrored the era's deeper conflict. Could serving God and crown ever justify betrayal of one's own soul? Not all spies wrestled with such dilemmas. For figures like Helena de Montfort, spying during the Barons' War against King Henry III, the cause sanctified the means. When captured and charged with dishonorable conduct, she famously retorted that loyalty to family and realm outweighed any knight's code. Her defiance underscored a brutal truth. In a fractured world where survival hung on information, ideals often bent to necessity. Even saintly rulers like Louis IX of France, celebrated for his piety, maintained networks of informants. The justification, that uncovering plots against the realm was a divine mandate, a twist of logic that turned sin into sacred duty. The most fascinating cases were those who weaponized morality itself. Double agents like the shadowy Blackfriar of Aragon played both sides of the ethical divide, confessing sins to priests who unknowingly leaked secrets, or forging papal seals to legitimize fabricated intelligence. Their exploits exposed the hypocrisy of an age where the same church that burned heretics quietly blessed the lies of favored monarchs. Yet for every cunning operator, there were dozens of low-level messengers and scouts who saw their work as no different from farming or smithing, a grim but honest trade feeding their families. This tension between honor and survival rippled beyond individual consciences. Entire legal systems grappled with espionage ambiguous status. While captured enemy knights were typically ransomed, spies faced summary hanging unless they held noble titles, in which case their executions were discreetly commuted to house arrest. The inconsistency revealed medieval society's uneasy compromise. Espionage was indispensable, yet too openly acknowledging its role would unravel the chivalric myths binding the social order. Perhaps the starkest illustration of this moral tightrope walked in the confessional. Surviving penitential manuals show priests wrestling with how to absolve spies was lying under orders of venial sin or mortal. Some theologians argued that saving lives through deception mirrored Rahab's biblical protection of Israelite scouts, while others condemned it as a Faustian bargain. The debate raged in hushed tones, much like the espionage it sought to judge. In the end, medieval spies inhabited a twilight realm where virtue was measured not by purity of method, but by the salvation of kingdoms, and where the only certainty was that no soul emerged from the game of shadows unscathed. The Crusades weren't just clashes of steel and faith, they were battles of wits where spies moved like ghosts through the chaos of holy war. On both sides of the conflict, operatives disguised themselves as pilgrims shuffling toward Jerusalem, their script bags hiding more than just prayer books. A merchant hawking spices in acres markets might be counting the number of Crusader ships in the harbor, while a deserter stumbling into Saladin's camp could be memorizing the layout of tents. The stakes couldn't have been higher. In a war where supply lines stretched across continents and alliances shifted like desert sands, a single piece of intelligence could mean the difference between a kingdom saved or a massacre. What made Crusader-era espionage so treacherous was the sheer cultural divide. A European spy in Muslim territory couldn't rely on blending in. He had to master not just the language, but the nuances of prayer times, dietary laws, even the way locals folded their arms during conversation. One slip could be fatal. Chronicles tell of a Templar agent who nearly blew his cover by using the wrong hand to accept a cup of coffee, a gesture so suspicious it earned him a night in a Damascus dungeon. Yet the reverse was just as dangerous. A Muslim operative in a Crusader camp had to navigate Frankish customs, like the strange insistence on bathing infrequently, or risk exposure. The most successful spies were cultural chameleons like the Armenian traders who worked both sides, their fluency in Arabic, Latin, and Turkish making them indispensable and doubly distrusted. Some of the era's most daring missions hinged on these cross-cultural gambits. During the siege of Antioch, a Syrian Christian named Firuz infiltrated the Crusader ranks as a defector, only to secretly correspond with his Muslim contacts by hiding messages inside hollowed-out melons delivered to the city walls. His betrayal nearly collapsed the crusade until a suspicious knight intercepted one of the fruit-borne dispatches. Meanwhile, Saladin's famed spy network, the Hashashin, didn't just gather intelligence, they weaponized psychological terror. Dressed as monks or lepers, they'd vanish into Crusader camps, leaving cryptic threats scrawled on commanders' tents or slipping poisoned figs into supply wagons. Their reputation for invisibility was so potent that merely whispering their name could paralyze an army with paranoia. But the Crusades also birthed unlikely alliances in the shadows. In Jerusalem, a peculiar underground economy flourished where Christian and Muslim spies traded secrets, not out of loyalty but mutual survival. A Hospitaller knight might barter the location of a rogue baron's raid for details about an approaching Seljuk army, each side knowing the exchange was temporary. Even religion took a backseat to pragmatism. A 12th century account describes a Muslim agent saving a Frankish counterpart from exposure, not out of mercy, but because a known spy is less dangerous than an unknown one. The legacy of these shadow wars lingers in unexpected ways. Many Crusader-era techniques, dead drops in market stalls, counterfeit pilgrim badges, even the use of medical knowledge as cover became staples of later espionage. And the blurred lines between faith and deception, they forced both sides to confront uncomfortable truths. When Richard the Lionheart discovered his trusted translator was actually a double agent feeding plans to Saladin, he didn't execute the man. He recruited him, realizing that in the game of shadows, adaptability trumped piety. The Crusades proved that even in wars fought in God's name, victory often went to those who mastered the art of the lie. For every messenger who slipped past enemy lines, there were countless others who never reached their destination, and the consequences could rewrite history in blood. Take the calamity at Bosworth Field in 1485, where King Richard III's desperate plea for reinforcements never reached his allies. The courier, likely ambushed or lost in the chaos of war, left Richard's forces outnumbered and outmaneuvered against Henry Tudor's army. By the time the king realized his messages had failed, it was too late. His charge into the fray became a death ride, immortalized by Shakespeare's cry of "a horse." A horse, but the real tragedy wasn't just the loss of a crown. It was the fragility of a system where one missing rider could topple a dynasty. Intercepted dispatches proved just as devastating. During the 100 Years' War, a French scout captured an English courier near Poitiers, discovering plans to split their forces. The French king, John II, adjusted his tactics only to walk straight into a trap. The captured messenger had been a pawn in a larger ruse, carrying false orders meant to mislead. This twist of deception turned the French victory into a disastrous rout, proving that even successful intercepts could backfire spectacularly. The real lesson: in medieval warfare, information was a double-edged sword, one that could cut the hand that wielded it. Some failures stemmed from sheer human error. In 1314, Scottish rebels under Robert the Bruce prepared to ambush English troops at Loudoun Hill until a drunken messenger stumbled into the wrong camp, slurring details of the plan to the very soldiers he was meant to outwit. The result, a bloodbath for the Scots, their element of surprise lost to a single ale-soaked mistake. Other times, nature intervened. A sudden storm in the English Channel once drowned a fleet of courier ships carrying Edward I's orders to Gascony, leaving his commanders paralyzed for weeks, their strategic window slamming shut. The most haunting cases were the near-misses messages that arrived just hours too late. When the Mongols besieged Kiev in 1240, a rider galloped through the night to warn neighboring princes of the approaching horde. He made it, but the rulers dismissed his frantic report as exaggeration. By the time they grasped the truth, the city was already in flames, its ashes a grim testament to the cost of hesitation. These failures forced medieval commanders to innovate, duplicate messengers sent by separate routes, encrypted backups sewn into clothing linings, even prearranged smoke signals as fail-safes. Yet for all their ingenuity, they couldn't eliminate the terrifying truth that in an age without satellites or radios, the fate of nations often hung on the stamina of a single horse, the steadiness of a lone rider's hand, or the luck of a moonlit road. Espionage wasn't just a tool of war, it was the invisible thread that could unravel entire empires. Take the Byzantines, whose legendary cryptography network had once been the envy of the medieval world. By the 14th century, that web of informants had frayed disastrously. When Ottoman forces began encircling Constantinople, the empire's spies, once so adept at intercepting enemy plans, missed critical signs of Sultan Mehmed II's innovations, his secret transport of ships over land to bypass the city's sea chains. This wasn't just a tactical oversight, it was a systemic collapse. The same spies who had once infiltrated Persian courts with ease now struggled to bribe Ottoman officers, their gold rendered useless by Mehmed's ruthless loyalty tests. The consequence, walls that had stood for 1,000 years fell in weeks, partly because the empire's eyes and ears had gone blind. Yet for every Byzantine collapse, there was a rising power whose ascent was fueled by sharper intelligence. Look at the Mongols, who conquered with more than just horsemanship. Their scouts didn't just map terrain, they catalogued the political fractures of every target. Before invading Khwarezmia, Genghis Khan's spies spent years embedded as merchants, noting which governors resented the Shah, which cities had weak granaries, even which gates were left unbarred at dawn. When the invasion came, they didn't just attack, they exploited every crack their intelligence had revealed. The result, an empire that crumbled from within before the first Mongol arrows struck. The contrast between these fates reveals a brutal truth. In the medieval world, intelligence was oxygen for empires. The moment a kingdom's spies grew complacent or were outmaneuvered, its doom was all but certain. Consider the fall of the Crusader states in the Levant. For decades, the Knights Templars' network of informants had kept them a step ahead of Muslim armies. But when Saladin's agents began recruiting disgruntled Christian merchants, the flow of secrets reversed. The fatal intelligence gap, a Templar courier's routine route through the Jordan Valley, predictable enough for Saladin's men to ambush him not once but 3 times in a year. Each intercepted message gave the Sultan another piece of the puzzle, until the Battle of Hattin became less a clash of armies than a masterclass in exploited weaknesses. What's chilling is how often these collapses hinged on human failings rather than sheer force. The Angevin Empire's grip on Normandy slipped not because of superior French strength, but because King John's spies in Paris were systematically turned into double agents, feeding him fabricated reports of noble loyalty until revolt caught him unprepared. Similarly, the once mighty Abbasid Caliphate didn't just crumble under Mongol swords. It was hollowed out decades earlier by Persian bureaucrats who'd infiltrated its administration, slowly diverting funds and manipulating succession to weaken the throne. These stories force us to rethink medieval power. Empires didn't just fall to bigger armies or bad harvests, they withered when their intelligence networks failed to adapt. The Byzantines assumed their old tactics would suffice against new enemies. The Crusaders underestimated how thoroughly their own informants had been compromised. And in every case, the winners weren't just stronger, they were better listeners in a world where whispers shaped destinies. The lesson echoes across centuries. The difference between survival and oblivion often lay not in the swords of soldiers, but in the silent, relentless work of those who moved through shadows. The shadowy tricks of medieval spies didn't vanish with the last castle siege. They evolved, weaving themselves into the very fabric of modern intelligence work. Consider the double agent, that master of betrayal who dances between loyalties. Today's intelligence agencies might swap out hooded cloaks for tailored suits, but the game remains startlingly similar. Take the infamous Cambridge spy ring of the Cold War, where British elites secretly served Moscow for decades. Their tradecraft, straight out of the Middle Ages, coded messages hidden in mundane correspondence, dead drops in public parks instead of hollowed-out tree trunks, and the same psychological manipulation that turned medieval knights against their lords. The tools have upgraded, but the human vulnerabilities they exploit, those haven't changed in 1,000 years. Even something as seemingly modern as cyber warfare owes a debt to medieval ingenuity. The ransomware attacks paralyzing hospitals and pipelines. They're the digital descendants of castle spies sabotaging grain stores or poisoning wells. Asymmetrical warfare targeting an enemy's weakest point. Medieval operatives would have understood the power of a well-placed lie circulating through social media today. They just used tavern gossip and forged letters instead of bots and deepfakes. The Byzantine tactic of spreading false rumors about invading armies now plays out as disinformation campaigns swaying elections. The battlefield has shifted from physical terrain to the algorithms shaping our perceptions, but the goal remains identical: control the narrative and you control the war. Perhaps the most enduring legacy lies in the art of survival. Medieval spies thrived by adapting, disguising themselves as pilgrims one day, merchants the next. That fluidity mirrors the undercover agents of our era, who might pose as aid workers or tech executives while gathering intelligence. The CIA's infamous Hollywood option of the 1960s, planting operatives in film crews to infiltrate hostile regions, would have earned nods of approval from Templar agents who hid in plain sight as monks. And just as medieval messengers memorized dispatches to avoid carrying incriminating papers, modern field agents now rely on encrypted burn phones and memory techniques to leave no trace. Yet for all our technological leaps, the greatest lessons from medieval espionage are profoundly human. The Venetian Council of Ten's meticulous profiling of potential traitors foreshadowed today's psychological vetting of intelligence recruits. The Mongols' use of fear as a weapon, sparing cities that surrendered without resistance, finds its echo in modern deterrence strategies. Even the medieval practice of compartmentalizing information, where no single spy knew the full network, remains the gold standard for protecting sources today. What these parallels reveal isn't just continuity, but a sobering truth about power. The castles may have crumbled and the parchment given way to fiber optic cables, but the essential dynamics of secrecy and influence endure. When a 21st century whistleblower flees to an embassy or a hacker collective exposes state secrets, they're walking paths first carved by those medieval messengers who slipped through the night, their pockets heavy with the weight of empires. The players and props have changed, but the game, the endless, shadowy dance of truth and deception, remains eerily the same. From the silent footsteps of spies to the galloping hooves of messengers, medieval warfare was as much about information as it was about swords and shields. These secret networks shaped battles, toppled kings, and forged empires, all while operating in the shadows. Their stories remind us that history isn't just written by the victors, but also by those who mastered the art of deception. Think about it, for every famous battlefield where armies clashed, there were countless unseen moments that decided the outcome long before the first arrow flew. A whispered conversation in a smoky tavern, a coded letter tucked into a pilgrim's boot, a mirror flashing across a valley, these were the real turning points. The medieval world understood something we often forget. Knowledge isn't just power, it's the difference between survival and annihilation. What's astonishing is how these ancient tactics still echo today. Modern intelligence agencies might trade pigeons for satellites and wax tablets for encrypted servers, but the core principles remain unchanged. A spy's ability to blend in, a messenger's speed and reliability, the delicate art of turning an enemy's trust against them. These aren't relics of the past. They're timeless tools in the endless dance between secrecy and discovery. And let's not forget the human cost. Behind every successful operation were real people, couriers who braved bandits and blizzards, informants who risked torture, double agents who lived every day in fear of exposure. Their courage and cunning didn't always earn them glory, but without them, the course of history would look very different. So the next time you read about a medieval battle or a fallen kingdom, take a closer look between the lines. The real story might not be in the clash of armies, but in the quiet movements of those who worked in darkness. If you've enjoyed unraveling these hidden threads of history, don't forget to like and subscribe, and drop a comment below about which spy or messenger's story fascinated you most. Who knows, the next great discovery might come from your own curiosity. After all, the past is full of secrets still waiting to be found.